Welcome to this plenary session. Before we begin, I want to set out a few points. This meeting will be held in a hybrid format with some members in the Senedd chamber and others joining by video conference. All members participating in proceedings of the Senedd, wherever they may be, will be treated equitably. A plenary meeting held using video conference in accordance with the standing orders of the Welsh Parliament constitutes Senedd proceedings for the purposes of the Government of Wales Act 2006. Some of the provisions of Standing Order 34 will apply for today's plenary meeting, and these are noted on your agenda. And I would remind members that standing orders relating to order in plenary meetings apply to this meeting and apply equally to members in the chamber as those joining virtually. Questions to the First Minister is our first agenda item, and the first question is from Michelle Brown.
What plans does Welsh Government have to build back greener after the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank the member for that question. Across the Welsh Government, we prepare for a green reconstruction post-COVID. The actions we are taking will generate a more sustainable and resilient future economy, tackle the climate emergency, and address the decline in biodiversity.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. Your friends at the TUC have said that any recovery must protect the environment, and the Future Generations Commissioner says we have a once-in-a-lifetime...
Michelle, can I just stop you there? I think we might have missed the start of your supplementary question. If you can start again.
Okay. Thank you for your answer, First Minister. Your friends at the TUC have said that any recovery must protect the environment, and the Future Generations Commissioner says we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to come up with visionary ideas and transformative investment to address health, the economy, and the ongoing climate and nature crises for the sake of Wales' long-term future. She says we need a new definition of prosperity based on well-being and a fairer, greener way of living. So what's one of your imaginative ideas? Build yet another road, the red route. A road that won't preserve nature and the environment, as the TUC, the Future Generations Commissioner and the Welsh people want, but will destroy it. You scrapped the M4 relief road because it would damage the environment in South Wales. So it's a shame for the people of North Wales that you don't care as much about us, but instead care more about lorry drivers who want to cross into and out of Ireland. Initially, he said it was chosen because it was the cheapest option, but the cost estimate has already risen by £20 million. We need every penny we have to be spent on recovery projects. When will the government drop the red route and put the money towards projects that will help our recovery and do so in a way that does not destroy forever ancient woodland and farmland?
Well, Llywydd, I have with me here, as members can see, the stakeholder briefing that was distributed to members and others about the plans for development of the Flintshire Corridor scheme. In case the member hasn't had an opportunity to see that document, let me just assure her that it makes it clear that the stage we are at with the red route is a preliminary design process, which will look at all the environmental and engineering issues raised during consultation in more detail. The preferred route will be developed further as a result of that consideration, including environmental, traffic and economic appraisals. And as the stakeholder briefing makes clear, all of that will be designed to minimise the impact of the improvements, the very necessary improvements on local residents, the landscape, air quality and biodiversity. So I don't dismiss for a moment the concerns that the member has raised. They're right and proper ones, but the process that we are embarked upon is designed exactly to explore with local people and with local stakeholders the issues the member raises and to resolve them in a way that takes account of those important matters.
Marty Davies.
Presiding Officer. First Minister, obviously if we are to build back and build back greener, it's important that businesses can survive the various stages of either regional or local lockdowns or even indeed national lockdowns. What confidence can you give businesses that they will be there at the end of this coronavirus outbreak? In particular, that once we do suppress it now the second time of asking, there's not going to be a third lockdown and later in the winter, a fourth lockdown, which will have a massive impact on business and business confidence, as well as liquidity of those businesses to be there to build back better, build back greener.
Well, the member makes 2 points there. He will welcome, I know, the announcement by my colleague Ken Skates of £60 million to help businesses specifically affected by the local health protection restrictions. And my colleague will be making a statement on the floor of the Senedd later this afternoon. We'll be able to explain more of the detail of that then. The second point that Andrew R.T. Davies makes is about events further into the year. And there, what I want to say is this, is that will depend, crucially, on the extent to which Welsh citizens continue to observe all the measures that will make a difference to further spikes in coronavirus in the future. So the government will do all the things that we can do. The health service, local authorities, public health organisations, the police, all those organisations that are working so hard to try and protect people and keep Wales safe will play our part. But in the end, coronavirus spreads when people meet together in circumstances that they shouldn't, when they travel unnecessarily, when they come into contact with others in ways that could be avoided, and the chances we have of avoiding further spikes and further local restrictions depends crucially on every one of us playing our part.
Question 2, Hugh Ranker Davies.
What discussions has the First Minister had with the UK Prime Minister regarding the UK Government's proposals for regional investment in Wales?
Well, so no discussions have been offered by the Prime Minister on this matter. We discussed our plans with other UK Government ministers, but progress remains slow, despite only 3 months remaining until EU funding enters its final phase.
Well, First Minister, I'm disappointed to find that no discussions has gone on at that very top level of government, but I don't put it at your door whatsoever. In Wales, with our established reserve powers model of devolution and the spending priorities flowing from clear, legally constituted policy framework underpinned by the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, we can argue in the Senedd over the social and economic and environmental priorities and success and failures in an open and accountable and democratic way, and we do. But I have a worry, First Minister. In England, prior to the last general election, we now know that 9 out of 10 of the top beneficiaries of increased education spend were Conservative marginal seats in affluent areas. And the National Audit Office has revealed that some of the most deprived parts of England were left out of a £3.6 billion scheme to regenerate town centres. 61 of those towns were chosen by ministers led by Community Secretary Robert Jenrick. All but one were Tory-held seats or targets. So, First Minister, do you share my worries that in the absence of clarity on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, the absence of engagement by the Prime Minister and the absence of a UK policy framework, there is a clear and present danger that Mr Johnson may be persuaded by those with fewer scruples of him and lack of understanding of devolution to view replacement EU funds as an opportunity for party political gerrymandering in Wales?
Well, so I think Hugh Ranker Davies makes a very important point, and he does so with all the authority of someone who has chaired our Regional Investment Steering Group, who chairs the European Structural Funds Monitoring Committee and chairs our European Advisory Group. So the things that he says to the Senate come with all the authority and the information that he has been able to draw together in those very important jobs. Now, the plans for future investment in Wales that he has drawn up with those colleagues, made in Wales arrangements reflecting international best practice, meeting the specific needs of different sectors and parts of Wales, with greater delegation of decision-making to regions. That is an approach that has been endorsed, not simply by the Senedd, but by the all-party parliamentary group chaired by our colleague Stephen Kinnock at Westminster, the WLGA, Universities Wales, the FSA, the CBI, the WCVA, and independent think tanks like the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. The danger is now that in pursuit of narrow sectional party political advantage, the UK government is engineering a position where they will take decisions away from the democratically elected Senedd and put them in the hands of an unelected, as far as Wales is concerned, Secretary of State for Wales. And I'm afraid all the warnings that Hugh Arranca-Davies has made this afternoon are very likely to turn out to be true unless we can stop those plans in their tracks. And we will be working as hard as we can to achieve exactly that.
Russell George.
Josh Lewis. First Minister, the OECD report into the future of regional development and public investment in Wales found that the labour market links between the communities of Mid Wales and South West Wales weren't particularly very strong. That recommendation is of no surprise to myself. The report proceeded to recommend that it would be beneficial to separate Mid Wales from South West Wales to create 4 distinct economic regions as opposed to the current 3. I wonder what considerations you and the Welsh Government have given to this particular recommendation and the other recommendations for regional investment within the OECD report.
Well, so I thank Russell George for that question. He draws attention to the very important OECD report that we commissioned, part of what, as I said earlier, our determination that regional economic development policy in Wales should be informed by international best practice. The report is being considered by the groups chaired by Hugh Arranca-Davies, and that will inform our thinking in the Welsh Government, and we will respond in full to the OECD's recommendations. But the point I make more generally, Llywyd, is that the report gives us in this Senedd members here the opportunity to bring all their experience and local knowledge to bear on the way that these decisions are made in Wales. The idea that these decisions should be taken away from us and made by a person sitting behind a desk in Whitehall who will know very, very little about Mid Wales, South West Wales, or any other parts that need to benefit from our funding in future, I think poses a real danger to us and would mean that in future the sorts of questions that Russell George has very properly raised here this afternoon would no longer be part of our considerations or our decision making.
Questions now from the party leaders. Leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Paul Davies.
First Minister, there's now been a series of important policy statements issued by Welsh Government ministers to the media instead of this chamber. Of course, it's vital that members are given the opportunity to respond to Welsh Government announcements on behalf of the people of Wales. Last week, you chose to make an announcement to the media that affected hundreds of thousands of people right across South Wales. You failed to answer questions on the timings of your statement. And this week, you've decided not to even turn up in person. First Minister, that disregard for Welsh democracy is unacceptable. And will you now guarantee that any future decisions will firstly be made in this chamber so that in the spirit of openness and transparency, elected members will have the opportunity to appropriately scrutinise the Welsh Government?
Absolutely.
Well, Llywyd, you said in introducing this afternoon's session that every member of the Senedd is equally able to participate, whether that is remotely or in person. So I will leave you to deal with the remarks that the Leader of the Opposition made about where people choose to take part in these proceedings. I say to people in Wales all the time that they should avoid unnecessary journeys, and I believe that I'm equally able to answer questions in the way that we are doing now, as I would be if I were in the chamber. It's entirely wrong for the government to ask people in Wales to take action in one direction and then not to behave in the same way ourselves. I think the member is quite wrong to suggest that somehow, because I'm answering questions in the way that I am, that is not satisfactory. But that's a point for you, Clywyd, I believe, rather than for me. As to the other point, it's plainly nonsensical. I answer questions on the floor of this Assembly. I make statements on the floor of this Assembly absolutely regularly, did so all the way through the recess when his government at Westminster wasn't available to answer a single question from any elected representative, and there's nothing at all that this government has to apologise for or answer for in being available and answerable to the Senedd of Wales.
Well, Llywydd, I'm not going to take any lectures off the First Minister, and I put it to you, First Minister, that you can turn up to your government offices in Cathays Park, but you can't turn up to the heart of Welsh democracy, which is also your place of work. And when it comes to making statements outside this chamber, I'm afraid you've got a track record as a government, and more than 2 million people across Wales are now living under your government's restrictions. The very least that you can do is offer their elected representatives a chance to question you on your decision-making, and that's why, firstly, making statements to this chamber is so important. Now, there are some very real concerns about the impact of local lockdowns on people who are living alone, and it's vital that the Welsh Government looks at the restrictions with a view to finding some way of allowing single-person households to mix with another person. There has been little recognition of the serious impact that this could have on people's mental health, particularly given that so many single-person households have already had to shield for most of this year. And I know you've said that you're concerned about those elderly people living on their own who at the moment are not able to mix with anybody else indoors. Therefore, can you tell us what you're doing about it? Because you're aware of the Scottish model, which allows a single person to form an extended household with one another. Knowing how desperately isolated some people across Wales must be feeling, can you tell us why the Welsh Government hasn't already changed the regulations in relation to single-person households? As I'm sure you'd agree, we have to offer these people hope.
Well, I believe I'm at the heart of Welsh democracy now, and I'm answering the member's questions, so I continue to fail to see what he thinks he has to complain about. As far as people who live in single-person households, I think that is an important issue. I've been discussing it with leaders of local authorities who are under local restrictions. I've been taking interest in the Scottish model of doing so. It is being considered as part of the 21-day review that we carry out here in Wales. So in Wales, we have stuck throughout to the pattern of reviewing our regulations every 3 weeks. That consideration for single adult households is part of the current 3-week review, which was discussed by Cabinet colleagues this morning. I'm hopeful that we will be able to complete the necessary regulations and the advice we need to take from the Chief Medical Officer and others in order to complete our consideration of it within the 3-week review that culminates this week.
First Minister, as more and more people across Wales are now living under stricter restrictions, it's absolutely essential that the Welsh Government's testing programme is as effective as possible and that capacity is being used. Now, last weekend you told us that currently in Wales we're operating around 2,000 to 3,000 tests a day from Welsh capacity, which is even significantly under the 9,000 tests a day target the Welsh Government initially promised. And yet a week earlier you said that an additional 28,000 tests per week could be processed with further capacity available to manage outbreaks across Wales. First Minister, it's absolutely vital that the system is capable of responding to spikes in testing that arise from outbreaks, and yet you've made it clear that for Wales to reach its full capacity, it would be difficult on a day-to-day basis. Given that you've invested a further £32 million to speed up turnaround times for coronavirus test results, can you tell us what fundamental changes have been delivered to our laboratory services to increase their capacity and resilience? And what urgent steps are you taking to ensure all labs in Wales are open and working? And more generally, how confident are you that Wales has a testing system that is capable of supporting our people over the winter months?
Sorry, I think if the member wants to quote me, he should try to do so accurately. I said at the weekend that the testing numbers this week would be over 5,000 and that it will rise to 8,000 within the Welsh system very shortly. The real struggle we face in the Welsh system at the moment is the problems faced by the lighthouse labs for which his party are responsible. Now, we've had an assurance from those lighthouse labs that they will be able to increase the service they provide to Wales from the 9,400 tests we currently have to 14,000 by the start of October and 19,000 by the start of November. I hope very much that that will turn out to be true, and that the lighthouse labs will be able to return to the level of service that they were providing to Wales some 4 weeks ago. But if you want to know where the struggle in Wales has been over recent weeks, it has been in the pressure that the lighthouse lab system has come under and the difficulties that his government of Westminster has experienced in coping with those pressures and putting that system back on track again.
Arweinydd Plaid Cymru, Adam Price.
Plaid Cymru leader Adam Price.
Many of us will have been surprised and somewhat alarmed at the scenes from the top of Snowdon over the weekend. Long queues of people attempting to reach the summit with complete disregard, it would appear, for social distancing guidelines. But it raises a wider issue. Of course, many of these will have been visitors, and there's nothing set out in the guidelines at the moment that stops someone from a COVID hotspot elsewhere in the UK travelling to areas of Wales currently with low community transmission. Why is it the case, First Minister, that you can't travel from Aberafan to Abergavenny, but you can travel from Manchester to Mynyddo'o?
Well, so I was going to begin by agreeing with Adam Price that those were alarming pictures. Let me make a number of points in reply, however. To begin with, it's really important that we've had lots of anxiety over the summer in holiday destinations about people travelling from elsewhere in the United Kingdom and the risk that that might pose to the spread of the virus in those areas. Actually, the evidence has turned out to be much more positive than that, and we don't have examples where the virus has got out of control in those holiday areas because it's been imported from elsewhere. So I think it's very important to be guided by the evidence, and the evidence is that that hasn't caused difficulties. And I think that that is a tribute to two things. It is because people have heard our message about visit Wales safely, and it's a tribute to the efforts that have been made in those communities to welcome people from elsewhere, which is so important to the local economy, while doing it in a way that does not cause a risk to public health. However, I think the member makes an important point. In Wales, when we get a hotspot area, we ask people not to travel outside that area other than for certain narrowly specified purposes. And going on holiday is not one of them. I wrote to the Prime Minister yesterday, urging him to do the same in England. I don't think it is right for us to institute a set of border controls trying to prevent people from elsewhere visiting Wales. I think that would lead us into all sorts of anomalous and difficult territory. But I do think that as we act to prevent people who live in hotspots in Wales from travelling to England and taking the risk of the virus with them, so the Prime Minister, in his capacity as the Prime Minister of England in this case, ought to do the same to prevent people from English hotspots from travelling elsewhere in England to Wales or other parts of the United Kingdom because of the risk that that undoubtedly poses. And I wrote to him yesterday asking him to do that, urging him to call a COBRA meeting for this week, as the First Minister of Scotland did at the weekend, and I look forward to a reply.
First Minister, the summer has been an extremely anxious time for young people, as you know, as a consequence of the A-level debacle. Many were left not knowing if they were going to university at all, let alone which one. Having arrived on campus last week, the worry now will be whether they will be allowed to return home for Christmas. Students like Meg, a first-year law student from Brecon, studying at Bath, need clarity. She says the message from the government are clearly confusing and would definitely be communicated better, particularly for students who have moved to a different country with different regulations. So can you ask these specific questions? To what extent is education exempt from rules allowing students to form new households? Can students studying and living in a restricted area in Wales but who live elsewhere return home? Can students studying and living in areas where no restrictions apply travel home, even if home is within an area of local restrictions? And finally, can students studying in one locally restricted area travel to another locally restricted area if this means getting home?
The rules governing young people in Wales are the same rules as govern everybody else. I am not prepared to single out young people for adverse treatment in the way that is sometimes being suggested. I agree with what Adam Price said in opening that second set of questions, that young people have had a very difficult time during coronavirus, and the Welsh Government, with the sector in Wales, is working very hard to make sure that even in these most difficult sets of circumstances, young people's welfare goes on being properly safeguarded, that their access to a high quality education is preserved throughout this term, and that they are not treated any differently to any other Welsh citizen. And the answers to Adam Price's questions are that the rules that would apply to any person in Wales would apply to a young person who is studying as well, and all of that is available to people who need to have answers to those questions, both on the Welsh Government website, but also in the specific advice that the different higher education institutions are working hard to communicate to people who have arrived to study at them.
On the 4th of September, First Minister Sage warned that there was a significant risk that higher education could amplify local and national transmission of COVID-19. The risk, they said, required national oversight. And once again, they identified testing as critically important. On July the 15th, you said today we can carry out 15,000 tests a day. On Sunday, you said 15,000 is not a sustainable day-to-day target. So as universities have been opening their doors, the testing system is failing. And if the problem is the Lighthouse Lab network, well, why did you buy into it and place your trust in the way that you did? Now, the advice from Sage at the beginning of this month was that a coordinated outbreak response strategy should urgently be put in place between government, HE institutions and local public health teams. But it seems currently, First Minister, there is no clear plan to support students, no clear plan to support the higher education sector. Christmas is only 12 weeks away. When can we expect that plan?
Well, so that plan exists, and the member is quite wrong to just spray around accusations that it doesn't exist when it very plainly does. And so very many people are working so hard to make sure that students in Wales are well looked after. He's quite wrong to say that the testing system is failing in Wales. We have over 100,000 students in Wales, and about 100 of them have been tested as having a positive case of coronavirus. Of our TTP system, 93% of close contacts continue to be contacted, 94% of positive cases reached, 85% of those within 24 hours, 92% within 48 hours. The system in Wales, and indeed the system in Scotland, is standing up to the testing time that we are going through. It's very much unlike what is happening elsewhere. As far as the Lighthouse Labs are concerned, I was urged many times on the floor of the Senedd to make sure that Wales took full advantage of the capacity that it would provide to us. It was right that we should do that. And as I said, until a number of weeks ago, the system was serving Wales very well. We want to see that system restored. We want to see it back, providing the volume of tests and the timeliness of tests that we know Wales needs. I urge UK ministers to make sure that they do everything they can to put us in that position. And then we will be very glad indeed again to be part of that system, which is providing thousands of tests to Welsh people and is part of the infrastructure that we will all be relying upon as we go further into the autumn and winter.
Arweinydd Plaid Brexit.
Leader of the Brexit Party, Mark Reckless.
First Minister, when you put Cardiff into local lockdown and through the force of law required people to work from home if reasonably practicable, did you consider the potential impact of that on our proceedings in the Senedd? Now, if you're correct when you say members are equally able to participate, whether remotely or in person, doesn't that imply that it is reasonably practicable for members to work from home? And if members take a different view, given that is law, may they be receiving a knock on the door from South Wales Police? You said earlier that my colleague will be making a statement on the floor of the chamber later today. Can I infer from that that some ministers will be coming in person to the chamber, even if you will not yourself? And you haven't said whether you're speaking from a well-appointed hut at the rear of your garden or whether you're speaking from your office in Cathays Park. If you are speaking from your office, then presumably you've determined it's not reasonably practical to work from home. So why don't you come to the chamber? And overall, when you say people must work from home by law, if reasonably practicable, would you ask people to do as you say, or to follow the example set by our presiding officer and the leader of the opposition?
Well, so I can assure the member that when the decision was taken to impose local restrictions in any part of Wales, then all aspects of that decision are carefully considered. It is for individual members to make a judgment about how they stay within the law. It is reasonably practicable for me to work from my office in Cathays Park, because in order to be able to answer members' questions, I need the support of staff in the Welsh Government who help me to make sure that I am as well equipped as I can be to provide answers that members have a right to expect. So it is reasonably practicable for me to work from here, and because I live in Cardiff and need to cross no boundaries to get here. Other members are bound by the regulations, just as every member of Welsh society in areas where local restrictions are in place. And I think people have an obligation to make sure that they are carefully considering the legal position they are in. I'm on the floor of the Senedd, Llywydd. As you made clear, virtual or physical participation is identical. I'm on the floor of the Senedd now answering questions. My colleague Ken Skates will answer questions remotely, and he will be on the floor as well.
So, First Minister, you say you're working from your office because it's reasonably practicable to do so, but isn't the law that you must work from home if it is reasonably practicable to do so? And given it's equally possible to participate remotely and physically, would not that be the case? Yet you choose not to come to the chamber, just as you chose last week to make announcements not in the chamber, but via the media. You say all these decisions and announcements and regulations that you keep on passing with great variety and regularity around coronavirus are carefully considered. On which note, could I ask whether your policy of making everyone leave pubs and restaurants at the same time is working to help us build herd immunity? Could I also ask what is happening in terms of our democracy and proposals chaired by a member of an official in your government to consider postponing the election and extending the term of this Welsh Parliament beyond 5 years? Wouldn't that be extraordinary, given the democratic norms that we have? In the United States, we see the first debate between the presidential contenders tonight. I know that Donald Trump wanted to delay the elections there, but that's been given very short shrift. Is it not the case that we need to vote in next May as required by law? And it would be quite wrong to extend our term further or to delay those elections. As one constituent of mine said today, and I wonder if you could answer this, if we can queue for the supermarket, surely we can queue to vote.
So is the regulations in place in Wales do not require people all to leave the pub at the same time. Indeed, it was a very deliberate decision not to do so. In England, everybody must be on the pavement at 10 o'clock at night, whether they are halfway through a meal or just began to drink. They must be outside at 10 p.m. And as you have seen in other places, that is clearly causing difficulties of public order and of public health. We decided to take exactly the opposite case here in Wales. People have time after 10 o'clock to complete what they are eating and drinking, to leave in an orderly way, spread out over that period. Exactly the opposite case obtains in Wales, so the one suggested in the question. So let me say, I am very committed to having an election in May of next year. That is absolutely the right thing. That is what I think should happen. It is not right that the Senedd should be extended beyond its current term. And that is, I feel very strongly that the Senedd needs a democratic refresh and the opportunity for people in Wales to decide who they wish to represent them in future should be in their hands, and it should be in their hands in May of next year. The only point I put to the member is this. None of us knows what the state of coronavirus will be at that time. And just as I want there to be an election, I want there to be an election where every Welsh citizen feels confident about being able to participate and is not put off from participation by fears that they may have about the risks that they would run to their health if coronavirus were once again to be at a very, very difficult pitch. So May is a very long way away, and none of us are in a position to be able to look into that crystal ball. I share the members' determination that we should vote in May of next year, but I simply put that one point to him, that we want an election in which every Welsh citizen feels that they can go to the polling station and are not put off from doing so because the state of public health at the time might be very off-putting to them. And it's just foolish not to be willing to contemplate that and to think about how we would cope with it were we to be faced by it.
Sian Gwenllian.
What discussions is the government having with relevant partners about visitor experiences in Wales in 2021?
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The Tourism Sector and the future recovery of the visit experience in Wales are discussed at regular meetings of the Tourism Task Force, attended by the Minister and the Deputy Minister with tourism responsibilities.
We have welcomed far more visitors than usual to tourist areas in my constituency this year. They have brought a boost of a second summer to the local economy, but the experience for the visitor or the local population hasn't always been pleasant. Parking problems, travel problems, long queues, not just on the top of Snowdon, but there are also litter problems. And these all have a negative impact on the visitor experience and, of course, create huge frustrations to the local population. Would you agree that we must find ways of controlling too much tourism and that the government has a prominent role in bringing all the relevant partners together in order to forward plan for a successful season next year?
Well,
Llywydd, may I thank Sian Gwenllian for her supplementary question. I agree with her on the things that we are trying to keep together. The tourism industry is extremely important to North Wales, and the answer or the solution to the problems is dependent on bringing people together around the table to think about how we can give extremely good experiences to people.
I Gymru I.
People come to Wales to see and to enjoy. And may I just add there, Llywydd, I had the privilege of taking part in a ceremony on Sunday evening to celebrate or note the awarding of World Heritage Site to the slate industry in Northwest Wales, and I welcomed Frau Friederike Hanse and others from UNESCO who want to visit the area, and that shows that people throughout the world want to come to see what we have here to offer in Wales. But the important thing to do is to do it in a way which safeguards and protects the things they want to see, and to draw in the local people and the people in the businesses and around the table with the local authorities and Welsh Government to plan together for the future.
Burns.
Good afternoon, First Minister. Please forgive me if I cut across anything you've already said. Unfortunately, your version of translation wasn't working at my computer. Many of the visitor experiences in Carmarthen, West and South Pembrokeshire are provided by micro-tourism businesses, whether they are eco-tree lodges in the Forest of Carmarthenshire or small campsites and businesses along the Pembrokeshire Coast National Park. And because they are very distinct and have a particular attraction to certain groups of people, they of course have been quite badly hurt by the COVID-19 pandemic. And I did listen very carefully to your reply to Adam Price earlier about whether or not people should make a journey to see us. But of course, I want to just read something from Micro-Tourism Wales, who go to say that our members are now dealing with confused guests looking to cancel or change their holidays because they do not understand the local lockdown policies. And yesterday, the Economy Minister, during the Welsh Government press conference, said, and I quote, "It is vital that people consider carefully whether their journeys are required." Microtourism businesses in my patch are already financially under the water because of the earlier lockdown. Are you able to give them any other guidance as to what they should say when someone phones them up from either England or a different part of Wales and says, I'm going to cancel my 2 weeks in your tree house in Carmarthenshire because I don't think I'm allowed to travel? Or even worse, they ask them whether they should travel or not, which puts the onus of making that decision on the operator.
Well, sorry, I have tremendous sympathy for the businesses that Angela Burns has highlighted. I was able myself to spend a short while in the holiday period in her constituency and could see just how hard people who earn a living through visitors were working to try and make up for the losses that they had sustained earlier in the year. So the reoccurrence of coronavirus across the United Kingdom is inevitably very challenging for them. We do our best to communicate as clearly as we can through the different networks that we have, through the group that I mentioned in my answer to Sian Gwenllian that meets every week with the Welsh Government to make sure that through the regional tourist arrangements we're conveying those messages. And today, Kensgate will make a statement on the floor of the Senedd, which will include a £20 million ring-fenced budget for hospitality and tourism over and above the £27 million that the sector has been able to draw down from the first two iterations of the Economic Recovery Fund. So I hope that that will be of some help to the businesses that Angela Burns has highlighted. We were working hard with the sector to try to extend the season so that people would have been able to go on working for longer, and the difficulties that we are experiencing as the virus takes hold once again are a blow both to those plans and to the hard-working people who have done so much to try to recoup something from the season for the businesses that they have worked so hard to build up.
Pedwar John Griffiths.
Will the First Minister provide an update on COVID-19 restrictions in Newport?
Thank John Griffiths. Following a sharp increase in cases, local restrictions were introduced in Newport on the 22nd of September. It is too early to make a definitive assessment, but the number of cases is starting to stabilise thanks to the efforts of local people. We monitor the situation daily and formally review local restrictions every week.
First Minister, it is important for people to know that complying with restrictions to drive them cases will result in timely easing of those restrictions when it is safe to do so. So I hear what you say about some indications that matters are moving in the right direction. But is there anything more you can say about compliance and effectiveness of the local measures and what that might mean for the timing of the lifting of those measures? And where people in local restriction areas had pre-booked holidays which are effective, will you do all you can to ensure the travel industry acts responsibly and provides full and unconditional refunds?
Thank John Griffiths for those points, and happy to confirm that the daily figures that I see and I'm advised on by our public health colleagues have continued to show a small but sustained fall in the number of cases in the Newport County Borough Council area. I spoke with the Chief Constable of Gwent Police twice last week and was encouraged by what she had to say about the level of compliance that is being seen in those local authorities subject to local restrictions. And she repeated a point made to me earlier about Caerphilly, that people in Newport want to do the right thing. They're not looking to find ways round the rules. They want to act within the spirit of the rules because they have understood that the more we do, the faster we will get on top of that local spike and the sooner we will be able to lift those restrictions. And I'm hugely grateful both to the citizens of Newport, but also to local authority officers and the police service for everything they are doing to help people to do the right thing. We'll be reviewing restrictions on Thursday of this week, and I will be discussing with my officials how we might begin step by step to lift those local restrictions. I cannot promise at all that we will be able to begin on that journey on this Thursday, but I want to make sure we are planning for the route out of those local restrictions with local people, with local agencies, so we can communicate that clearly to people who live in those localities. As to the second important point that John Griffiths raised about holiday arrangements, he will know that the Minister for Health and Social Services wrote earlier to the travel agent industry. He wrote again on the 23rd of September. I'm pleased that we've received a reply from the Association of British Insurers confirming that their members are committed to supporting their customers in the circumstances that John Griffiths set out, and that they are expecting to pay out £275 million in cancellation claims. What we need to see are those general sentiments, encouraging sentiments, delivered on the ground in the lives of people who have found their holidays disrupted.
Question 5, Carwyn Jones.
Forgive me, Llywydd. First Minister, what support has the Welsh Government provided to businesses in Bridgend during the coronavirus pandemic?
Can I thank Carwyn Jones. Llywydd, 474 micro and SME Bridgend businesses have been awarded funding through the Wales Only Economic Resilience Fund, totalling £88.1 million, with at least 2,500 jobs safeguarded up until the present time. We will continue to support businesses throughout Wales to stay viable through the pandemic and to respond to the inevitable challenges of Brexit.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. Businesses in Bridgend and across Wales, First Minister, will be very pleased to hear the announcement this week from the Minister of Economy and Transport with an extra £60 million worth of funding for businesses across Wales as they continue to face the challenges of coronavirus. In terms of businesses in Bridgend and across Wales, how might they go about accessing that funding and accessing help? And what sort of sums might they be reasonably expected to receive as a result of that of those applications?
Well, so thank Karen Jones for those supplementary questions. There's £140 million altogether in this third phase of the Economic Resilience Fund. It will open the eligibility checker for this latest phase will open on the 5th of October. And of course, I hope that any business who, having seen the detail, think that they may be eligible for help will make their way to that eligibility checker to make applications as soon as they are able to do so. Micro businesses will be able to apply for up to £10,000. SMEs will be able to apply for up to £150,000, and large businesses will be able to apply for up to £200,000. Now, of course, there are conditions and rules that apply around all of that, but that gives, I hope, an indication of the sort of scale of help that will be available. And so, just to give another sense of how the scheme has been working, I answered questions here in the Senedd earlier in the summer about the £5 million fund that we launched at that time to provide help for particularly small businesses, sole traders and so on. And over £4 million of that £5 million has already been awarded. So I think that demonstrates that we have a system in place that is not only responsive to the needs of Welsh businesses, but is able to respond as quickly as we are able to get the money from us and into their hands so that they can go on being successful businesses into the future.
Question 6, Laura Jones.
Will the First Minister make a statement on Welsh Government financial support for businesses affected by the coronavirus pandemic?
Thank the member for that. So our £1.7 billion business support package is the most generous offer of help anywhere in the United Kingdom. As I've said a number of times this afternoon, the Minister for Economy, Transport and North Wales will provide further details of Phase 3 of the Economic Resilience Fund in an oral statement later this afternoon.
Thank you, First Minister. I welcome what you've done already and look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say this afternoon. But I've been contacted by the owner of a small haulage firm working in the construction sector who needed financial support as building sites and quarries were closing due to the pandemic. He applied for the first phase of funding from the Economic Resilience Fund shortly after it became available, only to find it had been withdrawn because of demand. He then contacted Business Wales, who advised him to seek funding through the self-employed scheme, which he did and received a small payment. When he applied for more funding from the ERF, he was refused because he had claimed from HMRC. My constituent said if he'd known this advice would make him ineligible for further ERF funding, he wouldn't have applied. Minister, are you aware of more cases like this? And do you agree with me that it's simply not right this firm is now under threat due to advice received from Business Wales?
So I'm not, I'm afraid, familiar with the details of the specific firm to which the member refers, but I'm very willing to pursue the points that she has made. If she would like to provide me with details of the firm and the concerns that lie behind the question that she's raised on their behalf this afternoon, I will certainly make sure that they are pursued. And I thank the member for what she said in opening about welcoming the help that we are able to provide to businesses in Wales more generally.
Janet Finch-Saunders.
What plans does the Welsh Government have to tackle bovine TB in Wales?
The Welsh Government continues to implement our TB eradication programme, aiming to address all sources of infection in cattle. New herd incidence last year was the lowest for 15 years, with a 16% decline in incidence in the 12 months to June 2020.
Thank you, First Minister. Now, in the 12 months to June 2020, 10,823 cattle were slaughtered due to bovine TB. Now, yes, I agree that is a 12% decrease on the previous 12 months. However, I was shocked to hear in the CCERA committee the Minister describe this as the latest statistics are good. Well, they are not good if you speak to the farmers across Wales. In fact, they are scandalous, especially as there has been a 56% increase in new herd incidents in the low-risk areas of Wales. During the last 3 years, whilst 33,512 cattle have been slaughtered, only 16 licences have been issued to capture, mark and eradicate badgers to prevent the spread of this horrendous disease. First Minister, do you consider the latest statistics as being good? And what more are you doing to minimise the spread of bovine TB amongst our wildlife? Diolch.
Well, so I think we have to encourage people in the sector who work so hard when we see a 24 consecutive month decrease in new herd incidents, when we see that number being the lowest for 15 years, and in the first quarter of this year, the lowest in any quarter since figures began to be collected. So it's important we encourage those people in the sector who are doing everything they can, including farmers, of course, to deal with this dreadful disease by demonstrating that the actions they are taking are having a positive impact. And that is exactly what the Minister was trying to do. TB is a dreadful disease in cattle, and its impact on those farms who've had to see whole herds slaughtered is devastating. On people who've invested so much in those herds over so many years. The only way of tackling it is by tackling it on every front, through accurate testing, through high biosecurity standards, through individual herd action plans, and investing in the science as we do at the TB Centre of Excellence at Aberystwyth. And those are actions that every part of the sector has to take some responsibility for implementing. The member said in her supplementary question to me that it was scandalous at the number of new cases that we are seeing in low TB areas. But she will know that 82% of new cases in those low areas are traced to cattle that are bought and brought in to those areas, bringing TB with them. That's why high biosecurity standards, accurate testing, and the other measures that I have mentioned all have their part to play. And in that way, we will succeed together in eliminating this dreadful disease from Wales.
Ac yn ola, cwestiwn 8.
Finally, question 8, Darren Miller.
Will the First Minister make a statement on road safety in North Wales?
So I thank Darren Miller for that. Road safety remains a key concern for the Welsh Government. The Minister for Economy, Transport and North Wales has overseen a review of safety issues on trunk roads, and at the other end of the spectrum, the Deputy Minister in that department is taking forward initiatives such as the rollout of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, which by themselves will have an impact on road safety in North Wales and in other parts of Wales too.
Thank you for that answer, First Minister. One of the consequences of the increase in people working from home is that we've seen a significant reduction in traffic on many of our roads. And unfortunately, because there's less traffic, that has often led to an increase in speeding. And that is absolutely true on the A494 trunk road between Ruthin and Mould, much of which is in my constituency. We've had a number of serious accidents, unfortunately, some in which individuals have lost their lives in the Llanbedr area, and also in the Llanberis area, there's been a significant increase in speeding. Can I urge you, First Minister, to work with the Minister responsible for transport to look at what additional measures might be taken on this particular stretch of road, including whether it may be viable to introduce average speed cameras, which seem to have been so effective in killing speed rather than people on dangerous roads elsewhere in the country.
So can I thank Darren Miller for those very important follow-up questions. Fatalities in North Wales in September have been very distressing, and I know that he's been directly concerned with some of them. So I wanted to thank him for the letter that he sent in to the Minister at the end of August, and I know he's received a reply from Ken Skate specifically regarding road safety on the A494, measures that the Welsh Government has already taken and which need to be monitored now for their effectiveness. But to give him an assurance, as the letter did, that if those measures are not effective, then other measures will be considered of the sort that he has set out, so that we can do everything we can together to make sure that lives and young lives are not lost on roads in North Wales.
Diolch
I thank the First Minister.
Say that I've been asked for a point of order at this point by members, but I'll address the issue in this way. Firstly, all members, ministers and other members are fully participating equally in this Senedd, whether they do so virtually or here physically in the chamber. And secondly, to reassure members here present this afternoon that you do so in line with regulations and guidance. Now, for the rest of this lengthy afternoon and evening of work that we have in front of us, let's focus on the content of what we have to say rather than where we may be saying it from. The next item is the business statement. I call on the Trefnydd to make the business statement.